Hello, everyone, and welcome to our session on improving insights, database insights for APM. Real quick, I'm Jared. I'm on the product marketing side, but I was a consumer before. John, 30-second bio, go.
Yeah, I am a database specialist for our database team here at SolarWinds. Before I joined on the sales side of things, I was actually a product engineer, so I worked on data analytics and improving performance for cloud systems for about 6 years.
Awesome. I do have to commend you on your COVID hair. Your hair looks really strong. But that's not what we're here to talk about. What we're talking about, though, is there are a lot of great APM solutions out there, including ours, AppOptics. But where we've seen issues talking to customers, trade shows, personal experience, anything like that, where an APM is great telling you you've got code issues, you've got some tracing issues, but ultimately they fall a little short when it comes to the database.
Yep.
I sent the query in, it took 5 minutes, I really don't know what happened, figure it out. So, we're trying to talk about, hey, how do you look in the database? How do you flip the script? How do I see what the database is doing? I know there was a blog post the other day by David Gartner, our EVP, about databases, and data is the fuel of your company, and so really having good insights into that fuel, how quickly it's responding, what it's serving up is going to be really vital to applications, anything your company is trying to do. So John, I'd like to walk through a couple scenarios where we, kind of start maybe at an APM and dive into a database or vice versa, some things like that. You up for that?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, cool.
Why don't I go ahead?
Yeah, fire up the demo.
Sorry, go ahead.
So why don't we set up a use case?
Let me know.
Have like maybe an APM is saying like, hey, just the basic one I set up. Hey, I've got a query response time issue. I sent something in and it just took 10 seconds, 5 seconds, whatever it is. I'm looking from an application point of view. I'm a developer, whatever it is, and it's the database. It says it's the database. Where do I go?
Yeah, and so if you can see my screen, I've got our APM tool, AppOptics, pulled up, and we're actually looking at a case that looks a lot like that. So this is the last 3 hours for a service. This is called the booking service, and you can see here that we've got a lot of activity in the middle of the interval here. There's a lot of time being spent talking to a MongoDB database. And there's generally higher activity that we can see in terms of requests per second of the application. And if we go and look at our trace requests, we can dive into some of the slower ones here. I'm just going to highlight some of these slowest traces here and dive in, take a look. It's going to tell us right away, right? A lot of time is being spent talking to the database. We're making many different calls to this MongoDB instance, and we can see which queries are being executed, how long they're taking, the total time being spent. This is great when you have a case where there is a problem with the way the application is talking to the database. In our case, you can see, right, 247 instances of the query being run in a single request. That's a lot of activity for a single user request, right? And we can dive into the details and see what right, yeah, it's not exactly the best practice. And we can see, what the trace looks like here from the application's perspective, but it's a little short on details for what the database is seeing, right? Is this query, or are these queries slower than usual? Is the system overloaded? Why are we seeing such a big change in response time? And so what we can do is shift gears here and switch over to our database monitoring product, Database Performance Monitor. And if you can see the new screen here, this is showing the same MongoDB databases for the same period of time. And instead of looking at what the application is doing, we're looking specifically at what the database is doing. And this tells us a lot more information about what the workload looks like. And it may have been easy to overlook on the tracing view, but we're actually seeing a lot more activity here than we were when we were looking at our booking service. So what if I were to tell you that that booking service is one of several different services that's talking to this MongoDB instance and running queries? We could be seeing cases where there is just a fraction of the activity we were looking at for our service that's seeing performance slowdown is actually it's not indicative of the entire workload the database is seeing.
No,
So
I absolutely.
I look at this, there's a lot of activity here.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that you could be, setting out confirmation, you could be doing shipping and receiving, checking inventory. Your database is just not serving one application, one instance at one time. I mean, it's getting pulled in many different directions. Absolutely.
Yep. Yeah. And if we zoom out here as well, you can see how the workload is looking over a longer period of time. In our case, we can see very, very clearly at this point when we saw that big spike in activity, right around 9 a.m. this morning. There's a lot more going on than there was before, and we can take a look and see is there a bottleneck in the system? In this case, very high CPU utilization. You can see it right away. So that's kind of a classic case of looking at an APM solution is going to tell you, yeah, there's a problem. We can get more detail though if we dive down into the database, right?
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, at that point, I would probably be engaging with my development team saying, hey, looking at these graphs right here, hey, this was working great at 8 o'clock or prior to 8, 6, 5, whatever it was. And you send in these, whatever it was, 270 some odd requests in at whatever that time frame was. Yes, it's the database, but I don't know if there's so much to optimize on the database because you're optimizing it for such a small window where it was twiddling its thumbs 99% of the day. There's got to be a more efficient way to handle that as opposed to optimizing for that 1%, 5% of the day or whatever it may be.
Yeah, we could clearly see that there are things we could do better in the application, but there's also taking into consideration what's going on as a whole in terms of what the database is seeing. Maybe we can try and split up the workload a little bit more so that we don't see such a big spike at that point in time, right? Why are we seeing that big shift in activity? Was it something that's expected, or is it extraordinary event that happened in our system?
Okay. Well, what if I'm on the development team, or maybe the app engineer, something along those lines, and hey, this query works 99% of the time. I can't tell you it's slow always at 8 or whatever it is. It's just slow for no reason. I have no concept why. Hey, it may just always be performant. We didn't make any changes on our end. Where would we go from there? Because again, I'm thinking, hey, I see database, it's a query, it's slow. I have nothing. I bring nothing to the table as far as why is it slow. What would we discuss, or how would we go about troubleshooting deeper into that?
Yep. So why don't I jump right into our database performance monitor product this time, and we'll look at an example using Postgres instead of MongoDB. We'll mix up a little bit. And for reference, for those who are not familiar with DPM, we do support MySQL, Postgres, Redis, and MongoDB. So if you're using any of those databases, you can see them all on the same platform. But yeah, let's dive into a scenario where we've got a query that's usually fast, but every once in a while it's just a lot slower than we'd expect. And so here's a good example here. This insert statement that we see, it's not a whole lot of time most of the time, but there's a couple of big spikes here where we see huge spikes in activity. When you see behavior like this from the APM perspective, you can see the spikes, but it is a lot harder for us to understand what is actually causing them, right? We don't have that context and what else is happening in the database. So what we can do here within DPM is take a look at what else was running and whether or not there was a conflict at that time. So I'm going to change the view that I'm looking at here and see what else was happening in the database at the time that could have blocked that insert from running. So for those of you who are familiar with Postgres out here, we're going to take a look at the PG stat activity view and get historical view of what was going on and what queries were holding locks that were blocking others from proceeding. And we can see right at the time where that insert statement was, there's a big spike here where there's a locked table in exclusive mode that happened. And so it's a very clear example where we've got a query that's locking the entire table. We can't proceed with our insert statement because something else is holding that table and not letting us actually go ahead with our insert. This is the kind of thing that most APM tools aren't going to provide any level of visibility into. You need a tool that's specific for monitoring the database that shows you really what else is running in the system, what is holding a lock, what is blocked waiting for a lock if I want to see the other perspective. So again, here's my insert statement. We can see very clearly we had a number of these inserts that piled up, blocked waiting for that lock that we're holding with that block table statement. And so being able to see this level of visibility into what was happening in the workload at this point in time, are there other queries that were running that could have interfered with my statement? It's not the typical use case for an APM tool.
So what's interesting about this, though, is that I know you've been on a lot more conversations than I have, but with customers that are running other APM solutions, ours, other vendors out there, and even talking to them, how many times are they deploying code in a given day? I've heard some that, hey, we're pushing code 20 times a day, or maybe Black Friday, hey, we're an e-com site, we're not pushing any code that day or something like that. But I mean, there are a lot of use cases where code is getting changed numerous times a day, which can be affecting performance. But if you flip that on the head,
absolutely.
What now?
I was just saying, yeah, absolutely. Even more than 20 times a day, right? 100 times a day. It's not.
Yeah, but if you're thinking about how much data, though, that application is taking in and how much read and write and locking and block, like that is exponentially more, so there's more volatility on the database side than on an application side. So, again, why would you want to look at database monitoring? Why would you want to, think about it from that point of view is, even just on your Facebook or anything where there's a back-end database, you may not be doing much on the front end, but that back-end is saving all the data and releasing and adding and subtracting and all of that stuff. So really, there's a lot of volatility, again, back there, leaving yourself much more open to contention or a source of a problem, and so I think that's where sometimes APM solutions or even development departments in general, we're looking at the code, well, we didn't push anything or we made some changes and it looked fine, but you didn't realize, well, 500 people just bought golf balls or umbrellas or whatever it is that's happening behind the scenes. And again, you're not, hey, I bought golf balls. Well, I didn't realize that now went through some picking system and a shipping system and connected to FedEx or UPS and all of that. So really looking at it from both angles allows you to go, hey, yes, golf balls were bought, golf balls were sent, and we did this pretty quick. Where are some abilities, though, to, if I'm not a database expert, but I'm not, where can I get some insights into, like, where I can see possible recommendations or explain plans? Like, where can I get some more visibility into the, a query as opposed to it's just this query going crazy at this particular moment in time? Is there a way to kind of wean me into the troubleshooting process?
Yeah, absolutely. And I will actually switch gears one more time and show a MySQL instance. We're not playing favorites here.
All the databases, so all the things.
That's right. Yeah. So here we go. We'll look at a MySQL instance and pick a query here that's got higher latency. It's a select statement. We think we make it faster. If I click into it, I can get details about this query, where it's coming from in my data center. So I've actually got a couple of MySQL instances that are running it. I see one of them spending more time running this query than the other. But more importantly, I can get some real examples of this query. Not dissimilar from the traces we get in our APM platform. I can click and see a sample of this query running. That's going to give me a few things. It's going to show me information about what user is running the query, what database it's connected to, which of my database instances ran this statement. We also have some piece of information to tell me about how the database is running the query and whether or not it's doing anything that is going to be problematic. So over on the right here, I've got the explain plan. If you're familiar with reading explains, you can see right away, this is doing a type equals all. It's a full table scan for MySQL. And we're reading about 500,000 rows and doing a file sort. Yeah, it's pretty expensive. I can go even deeper than this, right? This is kind of a condensed view. We've also got the raw JSON. This has even more detail about what the database reported when it ran the query. But we can right away see there might be some room to improve here, right? We can at the very least add an index and get rid of that sorting operation. Something else that you'll notice in the bottom left-hand corner here, there's a section called failed rules. And what DPM is doing here is we're looking at this query ourselves and looking for patterns that are not really best practices for querying the database. So a couple of basic examples here, right? I'm doing a select statement. I don't have a where group or omit clause, so I'm always be returning every single row of the table. I'm also selecting all the columns using the star wildcard, which means all the data is coming back. If I don't need every single column, then that can slow things down, right? We're returning far more data than the application necessarily needs to return here. These are just two examples of what we look for. There's a lot of patterns as well that are going to be poor scalability or running into technological sharp edges. For example, with MySQL, it doesn't handle when you're trying to do pagination. It's actually a very expensive operation in MySQL. So we'll give you some context as to whether or not your queries are written according to best practices, and also show you exactly what the database is doing with them when they're being run.
Gotcha. No, that's cool. So, I mean, right now we've been pretty reactive in our troubleshooting. We've been waiting for an APM to give us a signal that something funky is going on in the database. Ultimately, I would never like to get those. I want to be as proactive as possible. I want my code and database to work perfectly well the first time. What, from a practitioner standpoint, your background, how would you implement DPM in a, post-deployment world? Like, hey, I'm not waiting for the APM to say something's going on. Like, hey, I push code. Here are the 5 things I need to check. I run CI/CD. So, okay, 5 things to check. On to the next one. Push code, and keep that, infinite loop of, deploying, checking, confirming, deploy, check, confirm, whatever it is. How would you, in your mind, how would you implement or work DPM into that?
Yeah, just like we want to check our APM platform and make sure that the application is behaving the way we expect after we make a change, we want to do the same thing within DPM, make sure the database it's talking to is also behaving as expected, no unexpected changes showing up. And so if I jump back up to DPM profiler, there's a few things we can do here. I'll keep the MySQL databases I've got, but let's filter down to just a particular application. So I've tagged my workload here, and I can look for everything that comes from my guestbook app. And that's just going to filter all the queries you see below. So it's only coming from that particular application in my system. So let's take a look at the last application deployment that was made for the guestbook app. I can overlay a change marker here. So the dashed line that you see right at the top of the hour is a deploy that happened. And we can look to see how the workload changed right at the time that we released the new version of this application. What I'm going to do is compare and look at, what did things look like 1 hour in the past? Is there any significant shift in the workload that we can see here? And that'll show me the before versus after for each of my top queries being run by my guestbook app. Right away, I can see there's a query that's got a lot more activity than it had previously. Could be new, it could be a feature that wasn't being taken advantage of. We can jump into that query, take a look, see if we need to revert that change or if it's working as expected. This is a really simple thing that you can do to make sure that anything that's changing in the workload that could have an impact on our database scalability is being caught as soon as it gets released. Same way we want to catch something on our APM solution. And we can also look for new work that's being introduced in the system as well, specifically. So if I want to search and find any query that's been seen for the first time, we can do that. There's a search page down here on the left. Let me clear it out. And we'll look for everything that's been newly introduced around the time my deploy happened. There's a little checkbox here for new queries only. You can see I've got a query that was first seen 1 hour in the past. We can jump in, take a look at its details, make sure it's working the way that we expect as well, right? Let's click into a sample, take a look at its display plan, make sure that the performance and the execution plan matches what we would expect based on our testing and stage.
So that right there, though, I mean, I want to say as an IT professional, I've probably asked 2 questions a million times. A, have you rebooted lately? Which obviously is not applicable to a database, but coming from the desktop realm of frontline help desk, I wouldn't work on any issue unless they rebooted. And then the second question is what's changed? And this definitely answers that second part of what's changed. We pushed something and we didn't expect it, or we did expect it. At least it's acknowledged that, hey, this is what is going on. This was not here an hour ago. a day ago, and this is what it's consuming, and this is what it's doing. So at least it answers that second part of the what's changed, which goes a long way, I think, in troubleshooting and figuring out what's going on issues. So I really liked seeing this because I think that does show a more complete picture when it comes to an application. I mean, I know how many times I'm in Salesforce or even some of our accounting systems here, and you run this report and you're just like, what is taking so long? It should be lickety split, and you just don't have visibility of there's a data dump, 5 other users are running some sort of query or something going on, or doing a report, and therefore it's just you're thinking about you and there's other things going on in there. So I do like that it gives us that other spin on the database. And showing that complete 360 view.
Yeah, some important factors I always like to remind people. Not every query that's being running through database is coming from an application that's in your APM platform. If you haven't instrumented something in APM, then it's not going to show up. With DPM, we're looking at every query that is running against the database, regardless of if it's a backup job or some cron that runs in the background at midnight that shouldn't affect user experience. Anything like that, we'll still be able to see it. Fast queries that are running all the time versus slow queries that are going to be really expensive to execute, doesn't matter. We'll see all the workload that's happening. The other thing that's important to keep in mind is even if your application doesn't talk to a database directly, there's probably one somewhere in the chain, right? You might be talking to another remote service that talks to a database. And so you may have changed the interaction from an application with a database without even realizing it, right? So being able to have that visibility into your data layer directly is just as important.
Yeah, no, I mean, it definitely is the differentiator of, success or not success. I mean, one of the example I always use is banking. Like we're so used to getting on our mobile phones, checking our account balance, and I expect that to be like in 2 seconds. And when it's, God forbid, it's more than 2 seconds, I'm sitting there like, what is going on? Is it my cell phone? Is it the bank? I expect data and I expect it to be returned lickety split and I expect it to be correct. So, having that visibility is really, really key and vital. I'm pretty sure we're running up close to the top of the hour and we were supposed to leave some time for Q&A. I'm trying to look at this on the left-hand side. It looked like there was actually some screen share issues, but I'm trying to see if I can weed through some of these to see if there were any database questions coming in. Boom, 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 boom. It seems like as it seems to be a query sample from DPM might not be every query digest is making in the system. Again, that's something you just talked about where DPM is going to show you everything coming in. You may have queries that are not being captured or monitored from your APM solution coming from a different thing. So again, that's giving you that other visibility. I said I worked in a manufacturing place and it was the same database that we processed an order, picked an order, connected the FedEx World Ship, linked those together. And so if you're just looking at order entry side, you're missing 3/4 of the actual transaction of golf balls or umbrellas leaving the warehouse, things along those lines. Boom, 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 boom. I'm trying to see where else. There's a lot of chat in here, but I don't know if there's a lot of questions in here outside. So this is a little difficult to try to weed through all of these. Yes, the sessions are all being recorded. Any contention on a database? Yes, we've asked that. Sounds like a sticky situation. I'm trying to read through these. I wish there was an easier way to. A lot of apps and additional functions for database management can impact the underlying performance. Boom, boom, boom. All great solutions. Cool. No, I think at least the ones I can quickly spot, we've probably answered natively throughout the conversation. Again, John, I do appreciate the time coming in here. I want to thank you also. This is your very first Thwack Camp, so welcome.
It is, yeah.
Camp number 1, hopefully Thwack Camp of many for you.